how does the global payment giant Stripe hire engineers, and why you should think about becoming a product engineer in today's interview with Coman. Hi, I'm IBB, and today I'm here with Coman, who's the site leader for Stripe's office in Bucharest. Hi, Horia, how are you doing?
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So what is your role today at Stripe?
I kind of do a little bit of everything. So it's my main responsibility to make sure that the site is running well, so that it's successful in Romania and that it's successful within the broader Stripe organization. I would say I do a lot of recruiting, a lot of reach out, a lot of media appearances, but I also do everything from ordering snacks in the office to making sure that the engineers are happy and they're delivering and sort of their problems are solved. And I'm generally the person on the ground for Stripe in general to make sure that everything here is running smoothly.
Awesome. Okay, so we're in your new office, new space, very nice, getting ready. So as far as Stripe coming to Bucharest, why open an office here? If you could come from the point of Stripe, I'm sure that you have good arguments from the local standpoint.
I would say there's a lot of reasons for that. There isn't a singular one. It all started late 2022, or at least this iteration of the program started late 2022, when we kind of looked at what was happening in the world and realized on the one hand we had this very limited view of the payments market, because more or less all of our engineering was in the United States, and the United States is very specific in its payments formats, if you will. It has credit cards, it has PayPal and a bunch of other smaller players, and that's it. But if you look globally, there's a lot of very specific and geographic specific payment methods that are big in one place and nowhere else. And we had support for them, but we didn't really understand them because we weren't using them day to day. We weren't using them to buy our groceries, etc. So we couldn't really build the right product for our customers and for our customers' customers. So we figured, this payments landscape is very global, very fragmented. We have also to be global and be there where our customers are. Kind of the other big push for this one was that realistically 99% of the developers aren't in Silicon Valley or in Seattle. So if you want to have access to that pool of talent, we have to go where the talent is. We are already cool being remote even before the pandemic. So we had a bit of this stuff in our DNA, but we wanted to go big this time and open some really big engineering hubs outside the US. And we wanted, of course, to look at Central and Eastern Europe because we have a really big density of talent in this area, a lot of great technology people. And then somewhere around April, let's say spring of last year, we decided to go to Romania to set up sort of the physical hub and all of this infrastructure for it. In October, we actually opened the site. We had like this big opening party and everything. And now a year later, if you will, we're about 50 people. We have teams that are already integrated into the company, that are owning big objectives for the company, that are solving incidents, and I hope at some point causing big incidents for the company and causing sort of this sort of chaos and sort of result that we're actually here. We're contributing to something big. So it's going, I would say, about as well as we expected it to go so far.
Okay, so you're a year in. Congratulations on that. What's the goal for the office? How many people do you plan to have here, ideally? And how has the first year gone so far?
So we want to grow big, I would say. So we want to be the way I'm putting it, we want to be a big engineering presence within the local tech ecosystem. We want to be a big engineering presence within the broader Stripe company. Okay. So with that, we can, let's say our goal for this year is to get to something like 70 people. We want to get to a couple, above 100 next year, and in
1,000 the year after that.
Knock on wood. Let's say in the fullness of time, which means 3-4 years, we want to be hundreds of engineers here. We also want to be other functions, so go-to-market, support, operations. We want to be a really round office in this way. And in the same vein, we want to be a big chunk of the whole engineering organization at the level of the company. So we want big projects to be placed here. We have big ambitions, and we want to, let's say, drive the success of the company from projects that we are doing here in Romania. So that's kind of the big ambition. How it's going, I would say, about as well as we expected it to go. So we wanted to get to, let's say, 70 or so people by the end of the year. We had some versions of, if this happens, then we can get to 100. If this other thing happens, then we're just going to be 50. 50, so we're about middle of the pack this way. I would say the biggest thing has been adapting the way the company works to the local, let's say, format of engineering, the local ecosystem, and figuring out how we reach out to candidates, how we engage with them, how we translate from company ways of doing things to local ways of doing things. And I would say the first 6 months of me being here was just about that, kind of educating the company, if you will, and a bit sort of educating the market in air quotes. You can't really change the way that the 100,000 engineers are working that work in Romania or the broader ecosystem, but you can have discussions, you can spread the word, you can tell them that there's a lot of great stuff happening here, and it's nice to try to get in, if you will.
So as far as making it work for the local ecosystem, was that a matter of just like making the hiring process different and so on? Was the matter of also integrating them in a company? Can you give examples?
Yeah, I would say we tried very specifically not to change anything in the hiring process. So we had this idea. So essentially, we didn't want to get in differently than other folks in the company. We didn't want to say, hey, and this is a common issue, I would say, when people perceive Eastern Europe as this low-cost location with talent that's kind of so-so, and that's totally not the case. The talent is great, and then the cost isn't really low anymore. It's comparable to what you see in the rest of Europe, more or less. So in that way, we did want to go for the same interview process with the same people from the company and just get in on the same level as everybody else that has gotten into Stripe. So we didn't have any issue in saying, hey, these people are different. They're kind of second-class engineers. We're the same as everybody else. We're operating at the same level. And I would say people also bring a bit of extra intensity because it is a new site. They know that it's important for Stripe to succeed. It's also important for the local ecosystem that this thing should work. So everybody's very on point in giving it their best, both in the projects that they're doing and then in just engaging and coming to this sort of conference, coming to student events and just being present in the industry so they can be ambassadors, if you will, of the company. So we kind of had this thing that we knew we more or less wanted to keep the same, and that people wouldn't sort of cast doubt on the quality of engineering here. The second thing that we managed to change was how we view compensation balance, how we engage with candidates. The company had this way of working where, let's say in many other places, people apply quite a lot to jobs, but in Romania, in a lot of places in Eastern Europe, you have to go after candidates. You have to convince them to join. You have to convince them to interview. You have to prepare them for the interviews differently. So that was where most of the work with Stripe was, because they weren't prepared initially to do all of this work, but just by seeing that this is how you succeed here, seeing that if we do all of this stuff, we actually get the better results, they gradually turned away. And now I'm glad to say we're operating in the way that we should for the local market, with dedicated recruiters, people that speak the local language, that understand the talent, that know what good looks like for the local market, and are bringing a lot of really nice people.
So I had this conversation with a site lead from one of the big tech companies, and they said that basically, like, as you mentioned, like, engineers weren't used to, in the local ecosystem, weren't used to putting in the work before the interviews. Why do you think that is, and why are the hiring processes maybe for Stripe or some of these US-based also tech companies different? What does it mean to prepare for an interview?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of points to unpack here. Since you've given me this platform, I'm going to take it to kind of say my truth. I would say the way it is right now, interviewing is like a separate skill that an engineer has. The same way as public speaking or writing or playing music are separate skills from actually being a good developer. The same way interviewing is a separate skill. Let's say it's kind of correlated with actually being good on the job, but it's not that. And in the US, in Western Europe, in other parts of the world, they kind of have picked up on this thing that you have to prepare for this skill, you have to practice at this skill, if you want to be good at it. And then compared to other skills that you might have, interviewing is actually a gatekeeper to accessing various nice companies, to being in certain environments that are good overall for your career. So they kind of have this way of working internalized that if you want to have a great career, you kind of have to be good at interviewing. And in order to be good at interviewing, you have to practice at interviewing. And you have to make this mental model of, I know it's not the job, but I have to get good at it in order to do the right job and work at Google, work at Amazon, Facebook, all of these nice companies. So there people are much more aligned. When they come to interviews, they kind of know it's a special game, a special setup, and they prepare for it, and then they do well in these circumstances. I think in Eastern Europe, we really don't have that. We don't have it for perhaps cultural reasons and for historical reasons. And it's no secret that a big chunk of IT here is outsourcing companies. And I would say the format of interviewing is different there. You have very few interviews. They are much more sort of skill-based and knowledge-based than they are algorithm-based or, let's say, games-based, if you will. And in that sense, the culture of interviewing is different. And I would say a lot more of your, let's say, prior history matters when you're interviewing. So if you worked at a strong company, people are going to believe that that they're going to be strong in their company and they're going to want to hire you after the very minimal of interviews. There's even places where after one interview you get hired.
References are a big player.
Exactly. So if you worked at the other strong company, you must be strong. If you have experience with this technology that we want, you're going to be a good fit for the project. Whereas for companies such as Stripe, the format is, it's great that you did all of this stuff, you get some extra leg up, but we really want to see how you do in our environment. And we have a battery of tests for you to just try to tease out that sort of information for you. And folks aren't that used to. It's not accurate to say they're not completely used to. There are a lot of big tech companies operating in the region, and let's say knowledge is spreading and awareness is spreading that it's a different type of setup, but it's still not universal. And then I would say there's still a lack of acknowledgement that the work you get to do in this sort of companies is really cool, it's really interesting. Compensation is also really cool and interesting. So there really is some sort of like a step change in your career as a developer in working in sort of setup. So it's kind of worthwhile to go through all of the tricks and just prepare for the interviews and do a lot of stuff. So there you go, kind of that's my soapbox moment, if you will.
So you're basically saying it's different from going to services-based or outsourcing industry to product-minded and so on.
Yeah.
Does that tie into the talk that you're going to have actually this afternoon at How to Web about like product-minded engineers? Is that like what you're talking about?
Exactly. And you can also see that if you look at trajectories of people, they might start in a services company, but if they move to a product company, generally they don't go back to a services context, because the work is different in a way that it is kind of hard to explain, but you're much more aligned with being successful with your product, being successful in your career if you are working at a product company than a services company.
Can you go more into that? Like, how is it more aligned?
I would say if you give the worst interpretation of what happens in a services company, it's like their incentives are not aligned with their clients. They want to bill more, they want to just hire a lot of people and not necessarily deliver fast. I'm not saying this is like the worst interpretation that could happen. Most of the people there do want to do a good job. They do want to have success with their customers and be, a good partner to them. But if you go in a product company, then 100% of the time you need to be aligned with the success of your product. Like you're selling your software, you're selling your product to your customers. So all of the work that you're doing needs to be in service of that. I would say that's the big thing of being a product engineer, if you will, kind of internalizing that thing and making it your mission to make the product successful. Viewing yourself as the actual owner of the product, not in the term of the product owner role, but you are actually the owner of the product and you are in charge of making it successful, and you need to actually do the right things as an owner to make that successful. Building the right stuff in the right way, perhaps speaking with customers and just being totally aligned with how this thing is going to be successful in the market and how it's going to be successful for the company as a business. And once you work like that, there's like not going back. There's no going back in a place where you can just kind of get instructions, where you're assigned projects, where you're just doing tasks but don't have the context of what's happening, why it's happening, why is it important, and primarily how is it going to be successful, and if you've actually achieved that measure of success. And I would say, if you're even looking at it from a broader perspective, most of us got into the game, if you will, wanted to be programmers because we like building stuff, and kind of this way of working in a product-minded way is the purest expression of doing that in a business environment. Like, you're building stuff and you're completely aligned with the success of that stuff. I would say nobody wanted to do this stuff just for getting orders from somebody or doing stuff that they don't understand. And somewhere along the way, this thread kind of gets torn, and people do end up in that setup. But I would say nobody would call it ideal for them. Like, the ideal is you're just building something that you believe in, that you feel you are the owner of, and that you sort of have this big hand in directing in the right way for it to be successful.
Let me just challenge you that from maybe a perspective that some engineers might hold, especially in the region. So, I need to sell myself in interviews, I need to speak to customers. It's not what engineers do. Engineers are here to make the technology, do the technology, whatever. What would you say to them, to that kind of thing, with it, which I think historically has been what engineers have thought of their work, right?
I have kind of two answers to this thing. One is, I really like this definition of what an engineer is from one of my buddies. When we had a sort of career orientation day in high school, and we had some people from the engineering schools come and speak with us and tell us about, do you guys want to be engineers? And the first question they asked was, does anybody know what an engineer is? And my buddy answered something like, an engineer is a person who solves problems with technology. And actually this got quite a big laugh from the class, because it felt very sort of, like very, very obvious on the one hand and not specific enough for that discussion. But I really believe in this definition. So as engineers, we solve practical problems for the world, if you will, using technology, right? And as software engineers, we use software, of course, but I think we should absolutely be more focused on the problem than we should be on the technology part of things. And I think here we see a lot of folks that are rather focusing on the technology part, not necessarily on the problem part. And that's nice, because technology is cool in itself, I would say, but it's not, I would say, the best way of going about things, because essentially what people care about in the end is their problems being solved, not you using some sort of nice
not
technology.
The camera you're using it for.
Exactly. And that's in a way how you also get, and this is again being philosophic, how you get access to the nice projects and the nice career, right? Because the nice project is not going to come in the tech stack that you want, it's going to come in whatever. The nice problems in the world are going to come in a shape that perhaps isn't even clear right now. You have to figure out a solution, and then you have to have this really big toolbox of tools, of technologies that you can deploy to solve that thing. It's not necessarily, if you identify as a Java developer, your next problem isn't going to come as a Java problem. It's going to come as a problem. I would also say that there is a way, like there's more ways to win here. One is being a product engineer, if you will, but you can also go down the path of explicitly being an expert in a technology, being an expert in a particular industry, or some combination of that. But you really have to kind of be an expert here. Like just saying, I know Java, therefore I'm a Java developer, I would say for myself, doesn't really cut it. You have to be there contributing to core libraries. You have to be there like a member of various committees. You really have to be an expert on Java to sort of say that that's a good path, like a long-term path for you. And then there's places for people like that, and every company of a certain size needs like deep experts in the technologies that they're using, but not a lot of them. I'd say most companies need generalists that can solve problems and that can have like a big toolbox they apply to those problems, and that ideally fall in love with the problem. They become, the owners of this problem for the company, and then they can drive it forward in a really nice way.
Why do you think that, and that's the point, like why do you think that someone, in order to be a Java expert or whatever, has to, again, contribute back, be active in community, etc. Again, isn't that like just, again, things that, again, a lot of engineers are not that used to, like contributing to open source, etc. is
I would say it is my personal opinion, so it's not,
no, of course.
It's not necessarily even a majority opinion. I would say if you wanna work and kind of identify and exclude everything else, you have to somehow make it worthwhile, right? Like you have to go the extra mile. If you're just saying, well, I'm a Java developer, I know Java, I know Spring, and that's all I know. To me, that sounds a bit self-limiting. Like if you just have this surface understanding of them, if you're just a user of these technologies, then I would say it's limiting to call yourself just that. You have to transition, you have to broaden. So you either go broad and you have this big toolbox and you're a generalist that can solve a lot of problems, or you go really deep. And those are, I would call, forms of success, if you will. If you're not doing that, I would say you're leaving a lot on the table. You're perhaps not necessarily focused on high performance that much, which is, for sure, like it's not everybody's cup of tea. But if you are focused on being sort of this high performance engineer that, essentially wants to take the most out of their career, which for better or worse is going to last 40 plus years. So all of us in this space are not even in the first third of our career. So we still have a long way to go. I would say you're much better off being a generalist or a very deep expert, kind of going the long way rather than stopping short and saying, I'm going to be kind of know a bit of things and operate like that. I would also add a hint of paranoia, which, a lot of people are becoming accustomed to, that it's not all highs in the tech industry. Like a lot of people started their career in the last 10-ish years, just after the last crisis. So they were only on a roll, myself included. Like I started my career just when the last crisis was kind of stopping. So I caught a glimpse of that, but that was it. But it's not a given that it's always growing, always new opportunities, always higher salaries. As we're seeing right now, there's a contraction in the market. So you kind of have to be a bit paranoid about your own career and your role in it, because our industry is not very kind to tech companies. Like I can name a bunch of like really massive tech companies from the 80s, hiring hundreds of thousands of people, and people, nowadays would struggle to remember their names or what they did. Yeah. And that's, 20 years ago. And even the titans of today, such as Google and Apple and what have you, they're kind of wobbling in the last 2 or 3 years. Like the perception of them as these perfect companies that can do no wrong definitely has eroded in the mind of many, many people. And you never know where the future is going to take them. But for sure, our careers are longer than the time span of any one company. So it's better to be paranoid about this stuff and sort of think a bit of the worst case situation and prepare yourself and sort of prepare your career for this long-term trajectory that you're going to have outside of any company, technology, or place that seems super cozy.
Cool. So basically nothing lasts forever, as you mentioned. Yeah. Where does then developer talent go, not just in Romania, but Central Eastern Europe in this case, and product management engineers, expert engineers, etc. Where do you see the developer market going? Because again, we did this research recently on what do developers want from their jobs and so on, and job security was obviously very important for them. But again, where do you see the talent pool going? What would you suggest also to developers who might want to apply for Stripe at other companies as well?
I would say the meta advice is to take charge of this stuff. Like our careers, as I said, are really long. They take a lot of time from our life, essentially from our families and other stuff we wanted to do. We kind of, for better or worse, we live in this physical world that's very limited, so we cannot afford to not work and not contribute back to society. So if we have these constraints, we best make the most out of them, essentially, and being in charge of your career is definitely one such thing. So, sort of local advice I would give to folks is that there is a phase change that's happening in the region on the structure of the industry. There is a contraction, if you will, in the services industry. You can see it in the metrics, you can see it in speaking with people, sort of anecdata, you can see it if you check Reddit and you see the kind of messages people are posting there. They are much more bearish, if you will, on the industry, especially if you're a new joiner or if you're somebody who was more of a free electron in the industry. So somebody who did a professional reconversion or who was mostly like a freelancer, not so well embedded in a company. So you can see that sort of outer layer is already in a sort of bad shape, not finding jobs for months at a time or having to find other sorts of jobs. And it can, I would say, this is a symptom. The root cause is big things are afoot in the global IT industry. Part of them are just sort of global contraction that is mirrored locally here with a lot of services company depending on projects from Western Europe and the US getting the green light. Part of them is more sort of secular changes. We have software eating the world and a lot of traditionally non-IT companies becoming tech companies and internalizing this stuff. And also AI to a degree is playing its part, though not yet as big as people would think. But I think the biggest change is that we are more expensive as a group in Eastern Europe, which is great for us individually. It might not be so great for the industry because it doesn't look so attractive for external folks. And essentially we kind of have two options. One is reduce the costs, and we already are seeing people just offer lower salaries for new joiners than for their old-timers, or we can increase our quality. And I would say this increasing our quality is by far the most attractive one, but it has a bunch of caveats. So it's not necessarily about being better technical people, because I think overall we are. Technical people here are the same as technical people in any other part of the world. What's lacking is this product mindedness and focusing on being owners of the product, understanding the business, understanding that area, where there's even a saying locally that it's not mine, but I'm repeating it because it's great. There's a lot of Steve Wozniaks in this area. There's not a lot of Steve Jobs, and we need a lot more Steve Jobs, essentially. So I would say local advice would be just orient yourself, kind of figure out long-term where you want to get and get into a company where you can actually achieve that. It might be a startup, like a lot of startups are hiring people, but they're having a hard time hiring them because they cannot match compensation or they are too hectic. But they're great learning environments, and there you can actually be, the actual owner of a product if you get in really early, or get into a company that is very product-oriented. We have small companies, we have very big companies that operate like this, and where you can learn, essentially. You can learn the craft. You're in an environment that encourages that sort of stuff and even demands it. We have a lot of people here that started very much tech-oriented and very much sort of, wouldn't it be nice if this thing had this feature or that feature? And now, several months in, they're very much like, does anybody need this feature? Have we spoken to customers? Do they actually use the feature in the way that we want it, etc.? So a very, I would say, fast mindset shift from being just builder of things to being a builder of the right things. And then this thing is going to pay dividends, because I do hope that at some point we're going to have this explosion of startups, of people that have liked working in this space and that see this as their next big challenge of getting some of that story, like some of that action for themselves.
So for those coming out of university and wanting to apply at Stripe, which is again a big brand, big company, etc., do you work with universities to get students interested? What have you done so far?
Yeah, absolutely. This was one of the selling points for me joining Stripe, because in other places where I've worked, we had a very clear we were only hiring seniors policy, which a bit felt like skimming off the top of the ecosystem. So I was really thrilled that Stripe has a really strong university recruitment program, and we wanted to do something even from the first year of operating here, like very, very early. We wanted to make a correct office with both senior people and sort of junior people and mid-level people, and just have the right distribution of seniorities, so we can get that nice intergenerational experience of training the new generations. We learn a lot from them as well, and I was surprised to see just how many really smart and capable people there are in the new generations. People that are very attuned to working in this sort of company, that have had internships in this sort of company. So I would say that has been by far our sort of easiest target. It's also interesting that it's a tough time in general for entry-level engineers nowadays, with a lot of companies not hiring. So it was also nice being able to be there, kind of offer some sort of opportunity at this point. So we want to hire a lot more people this year and in the future. And there's companies like in the ecosystem that are hiring 100 people every year, like for new grad positions. And we want to get there, essentially, and just be a massive. This is another way that you kind of shape the ecosystem. You get this massive amounts of people, you train them up in this particular way of working, and then they're going to be like that for forever, right? And they're going to be quite useful. The good stuff is, if you're starting out as an engineer now, in general, companies have very low expectations, right? So they know you're not going to know a lot of stuff. They know you're going to know a lot of theoretical stuff, but not as much practical stuff. So you have the easiest time getting in any sort of company when you're just graduating. And we are no different. So we have interviews, like a shorter interview process where you mostly get grilled on coding. So you really have to be good at this, not necessarily lead code style, but algorithmic type of coding. Our interviews are not puzzle-like, that they're not trying to catch you off guard or anything like that, but they do test, can this person code, has this person coded, do they know the patterns of their language, can they take something like a sentence, like a description of the problem, and actually turn it into code. It might not be the most efficient code, it might not be the prettiest, but can they do this exactly? Have they played around? We also have debugging interviews where people try to debug some problems in an actual code base, and we test, how much have they played with their tools, how much have they worked in a more realistic environment. We have an integration interview, which is, trying to get one system to speak with another, and between these two, we're trying to catch essentially how they work in a realistic environment and have they worked in a realistic environment. And let's say you don't have to take all of them. So you can fail one interview, and people generally fail the debugging interview because they just don't have as much experience debugging things when they're coming out of university. So in that way, it's even more relaxed than you'd think. But then you do have to nail the coding interviews and be sort of solid at that, and then you're kind of good to go, I would say. The same extends honestly to industry recruitment, like people who have 2+ years of experience. There we also want to see system design skills. Like, have you thought about how you're architecting fixed systems? What's the design of systems? Have you read, the right books, etc. But depending on your level of experience, more or less is expected of you. If you're 3 years of experience, not a lot is going to be expected of you. If you're 20 years of experience, you better rock it, essentially. You better have a good story there of stuff that you've done. And it's also a sort of combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Like, where have you been burned? What damage have you done? What sort of late nights have you spent debugging issues that you yourself have caused that are kind of informing your decisions? This is actually a place where people also trip, because the most experienced people actually have a sort of intuition for these things. It's like with chess players and all of those people that have a lot of experience. It's not that they're thinking about it. They've internalized this stuff so much that they can't really explain what they're doing.
It is what it is.
Yeah,
right?
it's just like an intuition, and then you have to kind of step back there and say, hey, I want to understand a bit more of your thinking process. You're on the right track, but lay it out loud. What's your intuition here? Why are you designing it this certain way? But certainly you see this, that it's not as easy. You kind of jump into the thing because it's the correct thing to do, because you just know it, because that's what your intuition is telling you. So you kind of have to decompile a bit of that knowledge for the interviewer to kind of figure out your general thinking. Or is it mostly like, is this person lucky? Do they just like have memorized a single solution and are using it, or are they the real deal? But that's like for senior folks, and for that it's like a different discussion.
But that's so interesting, actually. Like, as someone who as an editor works with engineers, like having them, for example, write blog posts or something like that, post onto paper their way of thinking could really help them in these situations, either future interviews, like even talking with colleagues or managers on how to like maybe solve a problem.
Yeah, it kind of ties into the general problem of explaining to non-tech people what you're trying to do, what something is complex. And then you always have to be on your edge here, because most of the folks you're going to be working with, especially as a senior engineer, aren't going to be technical. They're going to be people from
or not
product.
As technical, maybe.
Yeah, like from finance, or especially it's an expectation of ours that really senior engineers drive this really big, impactful projects and are in a way even project managers for those things. So you're going to have to deal with finance, with operations, with sales, with all of those folks. They're not going to be technical, and many times they're not going to care as much about, we need to do this migration first to the other database in order to solve your problem. So you have to get there and explain to them why it's important in a language they can understand, and with sort of stakes that they can wrap their heads around. And then it's definitely, I would say, on us to bridge that gap, right? A lot of engineers have this tendency not to and assume, well, if they don't understand, they're like, am I going to explain it to them? But it's really on us to explain all of this stuff to them and make ourselves heard as the partners and owners of the product at the table, rather than just, the guys who are executing orders and fixing stuff, and then occasionally complaining that nobody's listening to them and the system is old and broken and non-maintained. And it's kind of, on us. And rant here, I can go on a bit, but I'm going to end it on this note.
Cool. So for those who find that all of that interesting, where can they apply to a Stripe job in Bucharest?
So we have stripe.com/jobs. You can see there all of the jobs. You can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. So I'm Horia Coman on LinkedIn. You can write me an email. I'm Horia@Stripe. So really easy to know. So I would say it is easy to find us. So
Awesome.
definitely go there, apply, and we'll do our best to get to you ASAP and get you onboarded.
Awesome. We'll link that up all down below. Horia, thank you so much for this interview, and good luck with the office.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ivan. Nice being here.